Well, hello again and welcome to Spurgo's Thought for Your Week. I'm Pastor Jon from Sun City Church. Great to have you with us. And we continue on looking at the Psalms and Psalms chapter 10 today. And my thought for you is this, that the Lord knows the hopes of the helpless. First off, we're going to look at the first 6 verses in Psalms 10. They read, "Lord, why do you stand so far away? Why do you hide when I am in trouble? For the wicked arrogantly hunt down the poor. Let them be caught in the evil that they plan for others. For they brag about their evil desires. They praise the greedy and curse the Lord. For the wicked are too proud to seek God. They seem to think that God is dead. Yet they succeed in everything they do. They do not see your punishment awaiting them. They sneer at all their enemies, and they think nothing bad will ever happen to us. We will be free of trouble forever." Well, I'm sure, like the psalmist, I'm sure we have all probably asked God the same question, why? Particularly when we see those who perhaps dismiss God, who are narcissistic in their behaviour, who maybe take advantage of the vulnerable and the helpless and abuse others. And yet we see that they prosper in life. We see that there never seems to be any reckoning for their actions. And you know, it's okay to ask the question. It's okay to ask why sometimes we see good things happen to bad people. But we can also take comfort in the fact that God does indeed act in his own time, which is really the thought that I want to bring out to you today. Psalms 37 and verse 7 in the Living Bible says, "Rest in the Lord, wait patiently for him to act, and don't be envious of evil men who prosper." See, we as human beings, we live in the moment. We live in the temporary, but the Lord dwells in the eternal. And delays are not denials, because all things will be concluded in God's time. In the 1960s, the American rock band The Byrds released a song called "Turn, Turn." And what's so interesting about the song is that the lyrics come directly from the book of Ecclesiastes, which was written by Solomon, David's son. And it's Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Now, in verse 1 of that chapter, he writes, "For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven." In other words, under heaven there are a lot of times and seasons and appointed moments and dates. For everything there is a season. For every time there is an activity that's been ordained. And in Psalms chapter 10, David is expressing how we often can feel when we see things happening in our world and we see injustices happening, and we ask the question, but why, Lord? Why is that allowed to happen? Why do those people prosper? But David also brings that eternal perspective in the same way that his son Solomon does in Ecclesiastes. Solomon wrote in verse 11 of the same chapter 3, "God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart, but even so people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end." So as human beings, we can get a glimpse, but we can't see the beginning and the end. We don't have that eternal perspective that God has. Yet David in his psalm knows that ultimately no one really gets away with it. In verse 17 of Psalms 10, he writes, "Lord, you know the hopes of the helpless. Surely you will hear their cries and comfort them, and you will bring justice to the orphan and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them." So the Lord knows the hopes of those who are helpless. He knows their dreams and aspirations. We will not always understand, and we will ask the question why many times in life. But you see, here's the challenge. Faith is about trust. As the writer of Hebrews wrote in chapter 11, faith is the substance of things not yet seen. Faith means that we sometimes will have to live with unanswered questions in life. There will not always be the immediate response or the immediate answer that we're looking for. However, that doesn't mean that God doesn't know. That doesn't mean that God doesn't care or hear, or that he's not even responding. It means God is working to his purpose in his time. The Apostle Paul wrote in his second letter, 2 Peter chapter 3, and in verse 8, "But you must not forget this one thing, dear friends. A day is like 1,000 years to the Lord, and 1,000 years is like a day. For the Lord isn't really being slow about his promise, as some people think. No, he is being patient for your sakes, for he does not want anyone to be destroyed, but wants everyone to repent." The key point there is that the Lord, who, from his perspective, outside of time and space, he looks in one day or 1,000 years. Ultimately, God will answer. Isaiah 40 and verse 25, the Lord speaks to us and he says, "To whom will you compare me? And who is my equal?" asks the Holy One. "For look up into the heavens, who created all the stars. He brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by its name. Because of his great power and incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. O Jacob, how can you say that the Lord does not see your troubles? O Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Have you never heard? Have you never understood that the Lord is the everlasting God? He's the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary, and no one can measure the depths of his understanding." So my thought for you today is that the Lord knows the hopes of the helpless. And faith is when we don't always see the immediate result or the immediate consequence that we seek. But that doesn't mean that the Lord is not responding. In his time, in his place, according to his season, the Lord responds. And ultimately to him we all give an account. Ultimately to him everything comes back under his authority. So I encourage you to be comforted. And at times when we have those questions, we have to place those questions into the hands of faith and put our trust in the Lord. And we will see that he does indeed know, and he does indeed care, and he will answer in due season. Thank you for listening. May the Lord bless you this week, and I encourage you to keep the faith.